Welcome to Grow Fast, Grow Smart, the PI Playbook by Accelerator, the podcast exclusively designed to help personal injury law firms reach their full potential and serve their clients better. Let's jump in.
Hello, welcome to the PI Playbook, where we focus on top marketing and operations strategies for personal injury law firms. Brought to you by CJ Advertising and Accelerator Law Firm Consultants. This podcast is designed to help PI law firms grow fast and grow smart in all areas of their practice. Hello, my name is Stephanie Koehler, Associate Director of Content with CJ Advertising, and my guest is CJ's Senior Digital Content Writer, Seth Sparks. Welcome, Seth.
Thank you, Stephanie. I'm happy to be here.
I'm so happy to have you today. This is so fun. It's one of my favorite topics, and we're going to dig right in. But first, tell our listeners a little bit about your content writing background and the work you do at CJ.
Sure. So I started working in marketing content, web content. It was probably about 15 years ago. And at the time it was in different industries, sort of found my way into legal marketing about 12 years ago. And for the last 10, I would say of that, it's been the primary focus of what I do. And I've been at CJ since early 2020, right before COVID hit, when we were still in office. So yeah, happy to be here. Very happy to talk about our subject today.
Cool. So our subject today is helpful content. PI firms sometimes hear a lot about helpful content these days. Can you break down what Google actually means when they talk about helpful content?
Sure. Yeah. The helpful content from Google's definition is content primarily created to benefit people, which is an important note, to benefit people by providing reliable, original, and insightful information rather than being designed to rank high in search engine results. So for people, not for search engines. This was something that Google created. Google's helpful content system was created in, or at least rolled out in August of 2022. And then it was updated again, that system, a couple different times. And then eventually earlier this year, it just became incorporated into their whole, what they call their core algorithm, which is their main ranking system. So it used to be a standalone thing that would look at a site in its entirety and look at how helpful the content was. Now it's a bit more on a page by page basis, though if you have a bunch of low quality pages, it can affect your site-wide performance. The way that I think it's interesting to break this down and to think about it from Google's perspective, because they actually have extensive documentation about what is helpful content. A few of the key points that I always return to, the things that they say are helpful from a content perspective, are originality and insight. So does content provide original, comprehensive, and insightful information or analysis? There is source value. Does it avoid merely copying other sources and other websites out there, or is it adding substantial value instead? There's also a shareability aspect of it that they like to talk about, which is the content type of thing that you'd want to bookmark or share or recommend to others. Authority, quality of the content. Would this content be expected in a reputable publication? Would it feel like perfectly at home and in a decent publication? And is it well produced without significant errors? You're going to find a typo in the New York Times, but you're probably not going to find a ton of grammatical errors and things like that. So, and then also they talk about things like production care. Is the content carefully produced rather than mass produced or hastily created? So there are all these different ways that Google sort of specifies what it's looking for when it's looking at helpful content. And an important note here is that I spend a lot of my time on search engines looking at what actually ranks for different topics and keywords. And search engine results pages are called SERPs, and SERPs don't always reflect these guidelines. You can see exceptions to that, but you always run a serious risk of a future update once Google gets better at enforcing these guidelines. And that's what we've seen with the different iterations of the helpful content system. And then once it's pulled into the main core algorithm update. So if you're doing those things, if you're not following those best practices, if you're not bumping into problems yet, you probably will at some point.
Okay. So helpful content is helpful to humans. Google has pretty great documentation on what that means to them. So we've talked a little bit about that, and that really kind of understanding that Google itself and its algorithm are always working towards bringing people closer to the answers that they're looking for, right? And so following, the sort of guidelines of Google helpful content gets you close to there, but it's also the spirit of the thing, which is your website should be informational to humans so that they can make decisions and learn what they need. I love it, love it, love it. Ever since the launch of Google helpful content, I think all the writers at CJ have been like, yeah, that's right. We love writing and also reading. So how can firms put this into practice? Like, what are some ways that they can make their website content truly helpful for clients? Like, what should they do?
I'm with you too. I also want to say, like, you're totally right. Like, how great is that? So much jargon in our space about words that you have to break down and explain to people. You have to go look them up. But helpful content is such like a succinct way, and I'm glad that Google chose that word. And to your point, like that's how we like to think of it as people who create content. And essentially, the goal for firms, the goal of any business, or really most content creators, is, you're establishing trust. And that's the name of the game. If you're answering the questions that people have when they're looking into your service, and in this case, if you're a personal injury law firm, they're looking for an attorney or they're facing a legal problem, they probably have a lot of questions. And where do people go when they're looking for answers to their questions? They go online. So that's the goal. You want to build trust. And if you're the source of quality, credible information, you're building trust. If you're answering the most pressing questions that they have, you're building trust. And you do that. You build that trust by being helpful and creating helpful content. So you really have to obsess over the questions that people ask when they need legal help. And as you know, if you work within a law firm and you work closely with clients, you probably are familiar with a lot of those questions. And we also obsess about those things, not only in dialogue with clients, but also with the tools that we use. There are a lot of ways that you can find out what people search for and what they look up when they look up this topic or they look up another topic. So really obsessing over those things and addressing them thoroughly, transparently, and as honestly as possible. If you're doing that in your market and being specific as possible in your market, then that's how you're building that trust and being helpful and putting all of this into practice in your content marketing.
Absolutely. That is such great advice. So let's say, just in case there's a firm out there who has an older website and they have been following SEO guidelines differently over the years. It's been lots of different message keyword stuffing that SEOs have said for websites to use. So there is a firm with some outdated content out there. No one listening to this podcast, of course. But how could that firm tell if they had some unhelpful content, and what should they do about it?
That's a great question. And you're right. The practices have changed so much over the years. And there were times in the history of all of this in SEO and content marketing and content writing where, frankly, like not so great practices were effective, and strategies really made a difference. And Google's done a great job of curbing that. But so you want to think back, you want to think, okay, were you creating content back in the day when something like keyword stuffing, which is just you shoehorn your primary keyword on a page. If it's about a Dallas brain injury, then you're just shoving that in every other sentence. If that was something that you did and you've never revisited that, you could have a lot of older content. So if you have an older site, then one way to do that is actual manually reviewing it, and doing a deep dive on all the content on your site. And then there's another aspect of it, which is, if you're keeping an eye on the data and you're noticing like a downward trajectory, maybe it could be site wide, but even on a page level, like you're noticing, hey, we're seeing dips in performance for certain pages on our website. one of the things that you could ask yourself is, well, why is that? Is there something seasonal about it? Was there something timely about that piece where it's just not that relevant anymore? Or maybe the landscape has changed on search engine results pages, and now there's just a lot stronger content that competitors are offering, and you have to step up your game. So really looking at the data and saying, okay, are we losing traffic? And if so, is this something that we could address by improving this content? And then also being aware of, like, how long have you been doing this? What's out there? Are there pages from 2008 that have 150 words on them when really there should be something more up to date and really more thorough if you're trying to be as useful as possible with your content marketing efforts? So and that's something that should be done regularly. Depending on the resources available, if you can do that every year, then that's great. If you can do it every quarter, that's great. But pay attention to the data, and be mindful of any of those. They call them black hat tactics or gray hat tactics if it's kind of ambiguous, but it's like the seedy practices that people use to hack the system and cut in front of the people doing it the right way, I suppose. So if there's been a history of that on your website, then you need to be aware of that and take the steps needed to make sure that you're in good standing with Google, but ultimately the eye test. If you're a reader and you're reading this, does it make sense? Is it current?
Yeah, I know that's something that vexes our content department, which is blogs that, will cite a statistic that's from 2018, 2019, over 5 years old. And we have some processes in place to kind of address that and take the latest study whenever possible. And, I think that speaks right to the heart of helpful content, because if you're reading something and you're trusting the information a firm has provided you and it's wildly out of date, that does, just even cognitively in that reader's mind, casts a little bit of doubt. So it really speaks to even just the purpose of a site of building trust, of content to build trust in that relationship. Things like the details of dates, the last time a study was cited, they really matter. It's part of the experience.
You're absolutely right. It's such a big part of it. I mean, it goes back to what we're talking about. There are trust builders and there are trust eroders. And you can see all sorts of examples of this. If you do look at outdated content, it pops right out at you. In some cases, if a law is changed in your state and it doesn't reflect that, if a user knows that or later finds it out, boy, how much does that erode trust in the content of your website? And you're right, there's an association. The same thing that you're trying to accomplish with your content, which is to build trust. These may not even be folks who are necessarily like, I want to hire a lawyer today. That's not always the point of content marketing. A lot of times it's before that even begins. And you're trying to build that up by saying, okay, I recognize this. There's an association there. And there can also be the inverse of that, which is, oh yeah, I've been on their website. I've seen their content. It doesn't add up. So yeah, it's a great point.
And just fully recognizing the behemoth size of that task for a large website. So at CJ, you manage the content strategy for various firms. So you know all about the various ways that sizes of sites and ways that firms approach content. Can you give us a peek into your approach of balancing older and new content and kind of ensuring everything stays helpful?
Sure. Yeah. Well, like I mentioned, you definitely want to take a look at, like, how far does this content go back? Do we have a lot of older posts? By the way, every website has that. Every website has posts. If you've been doing it long enough, there are things out there. It doesn't mean that it's tanking your rankings, but it's something that you want to be aware of, especially if you're finding problems performing online. If you're not getting the rankings that you want, could that be a factor? So that's one aspect of it. And then, we are always just obsessed with the data that we're seeing. So being very mindful of, okay, we're seeing improvements here. We're seeing declines here. It's normal ebb and flow of any website. You see in one given quarter compared to the previous quarter, where have we improved this or what has fallen off? And then you have to really dig into to the search engines and also the information itself. It's like, okay, well, what's the root cause of this? So those are the questions that we ask. We look at data, and if we see that something is not performing like it used to be, we say, okay, well, what's the shortcomings here, or what is this lacking? What is this piece of content need to really communicate what we want it to communicate? And thinking through those things, thinking through those guidelines, again, to kind of bring it back to what Google offers about originality, insightful. Um, if you're if a user, if you're a reader, and you visit a website and you're reading this, do you come away with the answer that you needed, or do you have to go search more because you didn't get it here? I think that even asking that question, that's what we do. That's what we're looking at is if we see declines in performance, or if you just want to revisit the things that are still performing well, but you want to keep it that way. Those are the things that are just part of the mix. And you definitely want to keep new content coming. But you always want to budget some of your time to look at what you've done before and how you could improve upon it. And there's a lot of leverage that you have there. A lot of the work has been done for you if you're going to go revamp an older piece of content, depending on how badly it's outdated. But sometimes small tweaks can really make a big difference. You talked about studies and citing those things, and if it's an outdated study, is it a quick fix to update those things? And so yeah, it's an ongoing balancing act, but creating that new content and then leveraging those assets that you published before and saying, what can we do to make sure that this is relevant today?
Absolutely. So we have talked about being thoughtful, being helpful, using data to go back and understand not just what's happened in the past on your site, but where it needs to go forward, where some of the content gaps are. There's a lot of work, a lot of human involvement, but we cannot talk about web content in 2024 without talking about everyone's favorite subject, AI. So guess what? We're going to talk about it. All right. So what role do you think AI plays in the content creation process?
Oh, man, it's so true. It's everywhere, isn't it? It's just like the discussion is everywhere, and I'm gonna say that I'm glad because to me AI is like the best writing assistant I could ever ask for, and it's really to have that as an asset today, man, what I would have given 10 years ago to have that. In general, though, like taking a step back of what AI is capable of in this space and in the processes that I'm involved in and the ones that I'm kind of like adjacent to, I mean, it can do so much. Is it can analyze your website, it can compare that to your competitors, see where you have gaps in your content. It can help you analyze your existing pages content and make suggestions on what to add. It can map out a content strategy based on what's ranking on Google in your market, in your industry. And then it can even generate an entire web page or blog, though I wouldn't necessarily recommend just letting that happen
No?
without guardrails. But
I mean, you
it's
can do it, but
it's you could it could happen in theory, and to be honest, people are taking that strategy. I feel like that's a big part of why we see these things from Google, why we see these guidelines, is because people do lean into that stuff, and people are trying to just scale at length without any regard for quality. And but the tools themselves, if used properly, if used correctly, it's a game changer, and it can really do a lot to make your existing resources have better, create a better product, and to make you more efficient in the process itself. That's what it's best at, and that's typically where we use it. It's a great assistant. It's not a replacement, but it can really augment what you're doing.
absolutely. Well, as we mentioned, kind of some of the risks of AI content on websites. So I got to ask, we had this whole conversation about helpful content. Is it possible? Is there a risk for that AI tools might create unhelpful content?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And you can
It's
see
like,
it. It's so funny because if you take a very minimal prompt and give it to Chat GPT or Gemini or Claude, and you say, write me, I'll just stick with the example of like, write me a web page about brain injuries in Dallas. It will do so confidently and it will give you,
swagger
uh,
even.
yes. Oh, and it's just like, wow, okay, job done, mission accomplished. But wow, there's so many shortcomings in that content if you actually read it and dive into it, and you find that it doesn't meet a lot of the things that we were talking about. It's not unique. It's not specific. In some cases, just flat out wrong. So you really have to be discerning about it, and you really have to be strategic about how it's involved in your process. You can use AI to do all sorts of things, and some of my favorite use cases of AI is to, for example, let's say that you're writing about premises liability in a certain state. You can find the laws relevant to that and provide it to an AI and give it parameters to say, summarize this and give me the key takeaways for someone who's not a legal professional. And it will do that. You have to check it. You have to make sure that it's accurate. But wow, that's an amazing thing that can save you a ton of time. You can, like I said, you can run analysis of top performing pages for specific keywords and have it generate an outline, content ideas based on topics that your competitors are covering that you're not. You can sometimes just a basic question of, you've done the work, you've written a page, and then you just say to Chat GPT, how am I wrong in my assertion in this article? Or you could say, what am I missing? You could give it a list of like different types of injuries and say, am I overlooking anything? And it will offer you suggestions, and you should always check the suggestions, and make sure that your content and the AI's output is accurate and it's up to date, and it's helpful for you in your process. But so in each case, it's always have to be discerning about it. That's the risk you run if you don't do that, then you are just pumping content out there at a crazy rate without really any oversight or human involvement. And what you end up is like, because your goal is probably not to help people. Your goal is probably to shoot up the rankings on Google. So you have content that's being written by a computer for another computer, and like that's not getting you anywhere. It's the human element on the creation side, and of course on the audience side. Those are the things, and really the AI and the algorithm parts of this are just there to help these things find each other.
Yeah. We think about AI as assistant. Something that comes to mind for me is that the better your prompts are, the better your results are. So for that brain injury Dallas site, you can come in with the thoughtfulness, the data that you want, the points you want it to make, essentially the differentiation, the way that you want it to be unique. I have a unique perspective, and I'm looking for AI to either outline or expand on something I'm bringing as a human to the table. And I find it really helpful for that. So if you put in information, right, statistics or a point of view into the prompt, instead of getting the generic answer that a language model will develop for anyone, you're getting something that's again starts to think about your brand voice, or what you actually want to post online. So I think that's important too.
What you put into it is just so strongly correlated to what you get out of it. And that's certainly true of AI. And people talk about prompt engineering, and it's a fascinating field. And it's really, anyone who's not familiar with AI, I mean, that's essentially just refining how you communicate with the AI itself. And, you can work with it, and you can coach it on what you want it to do, and it gets better at it. And that's what makes the difference, is getting in there and engaging with it, and looking and looking at the output, being discerning about it, and making sure that this is what you're looking for. And if it's not, then you figure out, you go back to the drawing board and you do it again. And that's how you end up getting the product that you're hoping for. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you mentioned a couple of different AI models. So do you have a favorite one that you're using right now, and why? And which tool do you use in?
You know what? Okay, Chat GPT is what, $20 a month. And if you could say you can have one of the best assistants in the world available at your disposal for $20 a month, you probably do it. So I just suggest everybody do that. If it helps you in any capacity in your life, it's probably worth it. So I love Chat GPT. Also love Claude and Gemini. I think those are the kind of the big three at this point, and they all have their use cases. I love to pit them head to head in an AI showdown where I have a browser open and we have, let's take a prompt. Let's say that we've worked on a prompt and we've given it the context of what we want to accomplish and who the audience is of our content, what we want it to be about, and the topics we want it to hit. And then I'm going to turn around and I'm going to give that to these different AI platforms and see what works. So it depends on what's working the best at the time. I think that they seem to be better. They seem to have strengths and weaknesses that change over time and evolve over time. I think, I've seen Gemini do some cool stuff with referencing a little bit more analytical stuff. But then again, ChatGPT will then improve upon that. And it's always this back and forth. So I like to keep them all in the mix. And, it's, boy, how awesome is it to have that option to go back and forth and to be like, okay, I'm going to go with this assistant today because they're the ones that are being more useful.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh. This has been so informative. Thank you so much, Seth. Before we wrap up our conversation, do you have any final thoughts for our audience about SEO and content being helpful in this ever changing digital landscape?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think the thing that I always think about, and this is especially true if you come across something that's, here's the silver bullet for hacking the Google search engine results, or here's the hack that's cracked the code on the new algorithm update, is that those things typically, I believe it's a misguided way of looking at it, and they typically either don't work or they're kind of general things that, okay, that's great. Create original content is a good practice for everybody. I feel like ultimately the way that I think about this is Google and Bing and any other search engine that emerges over the next few years, if ChatGPT's search product becomes anything, all of these businesses have a goal to offer their users the best product possible. That's true of AI. It's true of search. So when you're thinking about SEO, what their goal is, that if you're searching for something as a user, they want to give you the best result possible, right? And they're constantly figuring out and tweaking their system to accomplish that goal. And it never stops. Your goal as someone who is creating content is to offer the best experience, the best content possible for your users, if you're optimizing for your users. So if you're doing that, if you're thinking about my users, my readers, what do they want to know? How can I answer those questions? And Google's doing their thing, you're going to meet at the same point, which is the user. The pitfall that people can fall into is to forget about the user and start thinking about the algorithm, or start thinking about Google. And what that means is you're constantly aiming at a moving target, and you're constantly trying to figure out a system that changes literally several times each day and has significant changes several times each year. So you could do that. It's a game that a lot of people in our industry play, which is like, I'm trying to crack the code on Google. But Google, sometimes you're not even convinced that people that work at Google are fully aware of what their code entails, because it's so complex and it's ever changing. If you focus on how can I be useful, how can I be helpful to my users in the content that I create, then you're on the same trajectory as all of these other businesses that are creating these products that you're trying to rank on or trying to get featured on. So focus on that. Don't focus so much on the quick shortcut or the quick hack that you can get. Do the hard work. Focus on the people that you want to read this content. And if you're doing that, then you're future-proofing all of the work, the hard work that you put into all of this stuff. It won't be disrupted by an algorithm update. Sure, you need to pay attention to the details. You need to pay attention to what's going on in the SEO world and with search engines. But ultimately, your eyes need to be on the prize, which is meeting the needs of your users.
Yeah, and ultimately convincing them to convert, right? So it's the other half of that conversation is, yes, showing up on the page is a goal, and answering questions that people want to know the answer to is part of something that would help you land on the search engine results page. Like that is what helpful content is asking us to do. But the other half of that conversation is when a user reads the page and says, gosh darn, that was helpful. I really feel good about this law firm. They answered my question, and they walk away regardless of where they are on the funnel with a positive experience. And that ultimately at the moment of decision, when a user is deciding which law firm is the one that they're going to trust with their case, with their loved ones, with something that is momentous to them in their lives, helpful content is going to make that difference.
Absolutely. I could not say it better myself. That's what you're doing. The trust, right? That's what it's all about.
All about trust. Well, I trust you as our content lead. Thank you so much for your time today, for your excellent insights. And I hope that folks out there have learned a little something about helpful content and what it really means. Like, how does it actually work in the world? So thank you, Seth.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Thanks for listening to Grow Fast, Grow Smart, the PI Playbook by Accelerator. If you like what you heard today, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Until next time.